So the film that I decided to view by Linklater is called Everybody Wants Some. And yes, there's actually two exclamation points in the title of this film. This is just one of the many choices that Linklater does for the film to make it unique, but still apart like his other films. So if you don't know who he is, this is Richard Linklater. This is who we've been studying the entire class. So he was born in 1960, so it wasn't too long ago. He wasn't interested in film until after he left college, and then he's done some traveling, and then he decided, hey, I'm into film. And that's when he really developed into it. He is famous for movies such as The School of Rock, Slacker, Dazed and Confused, Before Midnight, and Sunset and Sunrise, and that whole trilogy. He has made very popular films over time, and although they're not all the same, like this past week we watched an animated film by him that is nothing like School of Rock with Jack Black or Bernie or Slacker. They are all unique, but they all have the same elements that Linklater likes to use that represents him. His latest film is called Hitman, and that was actually made in 2003. That was made this year. So he's still producing movies, and he's still at the top of the list for one of the best directors around. So, Everybody Wants Some. This was actually made in 2016, even though it looks like later. It has really good camera quality, but it's supposed to represent the 80s and way before this time. So it's a modern day film made about what it was like to be in the 80s. So the genre is comedy and sport. It's mainly a comedy because there's very humor elements in it, but it's a sport film that you could categorize it in because it's about baseball. The whole film is centered around baseball, and I'll talk more about the plot, but that is the whole reason that this guy is able to come to this college and meet all these new people and have this experience. So baseball is why we're able to have this movie. It has famous actors such as Glenn Powell, Jake Jenner, and Zoe Dutch. There are some people that I haven't heard of, but these are apparently famous actors that have been in other great works. And Linklater is known for using both famous and infamous actors. Like his first few films, he used some of his friends from around his hometown. And then later we see him using Jack Black, who is a very famous and well-known actor. So the movie description. I know not many of you probably chose to watch this. So it is about 1980s in Texas and college baseball. Like I said earlier, baseball is a huge deal, but they're in college. They are freshmen. The main characters are freshmen. And then, of course, you have older players on the team, but it focuses on freshmen. They have a lovable protagonist, which Linklater has in several of his other films, like in Bernie. I don't know if you chose to watch Bernie, but he was a murderer. He murdered an old lady. You could say it was on accident or not, but he was. And he was still lovable by everybody in his town, and like me and the viewers. We were all in love with Bernie. He was a great person. So even though he was a murderer, he was still a lovable protagonist. In this case, in this film, the main actor, Jake, and even the girlfriend and some of the side characters, they're very lovable people, even though they don't make some good choices in their life. They're freshmen in college, so they're gonna make some dumb choices, but they're still lovable protagonists. So in the plot, there's themes of love and there's character development all throughout it. Again, you're gonna have freshmen who learn to grow, and so that's just some of the themes in it. So let's get into the characters, because I know you haven't watched this film, and I want to give you a little insight of who's who. So we have Jay Niles. He's a baseball player who wants to be the best, and he has serious anger issues. We have to have this type of character in the film. There's Beverly. This is Jake's love interest. She's really sweet, but she's also a girl boss, and she wants to have that loving freshman college relationship. At the same time, she's not going to pull up with bull crap. We have Billy. He is a stereotypical Southern guy. He has a Southern accent. He's more serious. He likes to follow the rules, and he is Jake's roommate. There's Willoughby. I love this name. He turns out, I'm going to give a spoiler, he turns out to not be eligible enough to play baseball. Like, he's too old. He is a stoner, but he is the most chill person in the entire film. There's Dell Douglas, he's just an unproblematic side character. And Jake Bradford, he is the main character, he is the freshman, and he is what this movie's centered about. He decides to come to this college and join the baseball team and learn to live life while at it. Now, I want to focus more on Linklater and how he relates it to other films. And I'm going to do this through plot, camera work, dialogue, lighting, and music. Although there's several other elements, these are the main ones that I want to focus in on for this presentation. Here is the plot. I have a character, this is just Jake in his everyday life, riding in a car. The plot, character development. Of course, we have the coming of age, which is prevalent in a lot of films, especially in Linklater's films. The coming of age is a topic that Linklater uses, but he doesn't really focus on, he doesn't want that to be the main theme of every film that he produces. But there is character development as Jake. He just joins, wants to fit in on the baseball team, then he ends up finding out he's in love. He does very well in baseball. So we have the development of characters, the type of characters. We have the lovable protagonist who could do some bad stuff, but we're still going to love him anyway. There's the love interest, which not all of his films have a love interest, but that seems to be not prevalent as often, but is a widely used theme, is love. Then we have the unproblematic characters who's just there, and then we have some characters who cause a conflict, typical things, but Linklater does use this in his films. There's plot progression, again, in every film, but like in other films that he uses, whether it's sports or not, the plot starts out, it's calm, there's sometimes an introduction. The introduction may not always make sense, but by the end of the film, it does. Like in the most recent film, Waking Life, the introduction didn't really make sense, but by the end, it did. So he uses that, or in other cases, like in Everybody Wants Some, or in other cases, like in this film, he uses plot progression, that there is an introduction that's clear. You can assume he's going to live in this house with other guys for college, and then it concludes with a resolution. So I also put that introduction and conclusion. The introduction is him coming to college, and the conclusion is him liking this girl and starting to live his best college life. So there is a clear introduction and conclusion. I want to kind of compare and contrast that to Waking Life. As I said before, the introduction and conclusion didn't make sense without each other and without the middle of the film. So that is different from this, but there is still a clear introduction and conclusion to his films. Next, camera angles. I loved paying attention to the camera angles. Now, I included this picture because it really went along with what I want to talk about, especially with eye level. But first I want to talk about perspective. You always get a perspective like you're with them, whether you're sitting on the ground like in this picture, or you're standing beside these people talking. And this goes along with eye level. Here in this picture, you can see you're on the ground sitting like you're one of the boys doing whatever it is that they're doing. In other films, you are usually eye level. There's a scene in Bernie where you're also sitting down eye level, like you're in a chair, as Bernie and his friend is also in a chair. Now when you're standing up, like in films before, the eye level is always right there or slightly above or below. It's never a dramatic scene. It's never way above or way below. You always feel like you're a part of the scene with the people. And there's also jumps and pans. At the beginning of the semester, we went over some of his films where it had no jumps, no cuts. It was just gradually focused, turning from one person to another, pans, and then it gets more to a modern level. You see more technique with where the camera cuts to and who it cuts to when it's talking. And camera angle is just something you can really focus on every single one of his films and notice something about. It could be different, but for the most part, he uses the same tactics of perspective and eye level and how he jumps, pans, or cuts to other scenes. Dialogue. Dialogue is, again, something that you can see in every single film that you watch. You just have to pay more attention to it, because some people like to focus more on what they're saying rather than like how they say it. So you really need to focus on both of them. The language and accents, you have to pay attention to what language they use. This was made not too long ago. This was made in the 21st century, but it's about Texas in the 80s. So you're going to see Texas accents. It's college. You're going to see accents from all over, and you're going to see language that they would use in the 80s and in Texas. Like Billy, he has a heavy southern accent that the guys make fun of, even though he's in Texas, and you would assume that most Texans have an accent, but it's really true, because not everybody in the South has an accent. I'm a bad example of this, but there's a lot of people in the South who don't have an accent. So he's really using what state they're in, the setting, to his advantage. You need to use for the language. They're in college. They're using slang terms. They're using sophisticated words too. What he's doing is making a 21st century film be in the 80s for some nostalgic factor, and he does a really, really good job of this. There are some monologues that people use. He does this in other films too, like in Waking Life. There would just be people talking for minutes at a time, and it doesn't feel like a monologue that they're doing. It feels like you're in and a part of that conversation with them, and for the most part, people do talking back and forth, but monologues feel different when Linklater does it. It has a sense of purpose. He also uses comedy. Of course, this is a comedy film with baseball, but he uses a lot of comedic elements that stay true to realism, and also some that may be a little more off the wall to give it that comedic effect. And then syntax to the character. Again, Billy, who is from Texas, he's going to use different syntax, which is sentences. He's going to use different dialogues than other people who are from farther away or who are older. So people really need to pay attention to the setting and a part of the dialogue, what they say, their language, their accent, and how it relates to the film. Linklater does a great job at implementing dialogue and language into his films that cater to each of his films. In Bernie, he had Bernie talk really, really proper, and that helped him be very likable. That helped his character development. And for here, how the people talk, it helps their character development. Next, we have lighting. There's just a few touches on this. The lighting seems natural. I've always noted this in all of his films so far. The lighting seems natural. In Boyhood, I remember they were in the back of a car. The main character and his girlfriend, his love interest, they were in the back of the car at night, and it was dark. You couldn't see them, because in the back of the car at night, you're not going to be able to see someone. They didn't have a spotlight. They didn't have other lights on them. And I wanted to relate that to this film, because the lighting seems natural. In the bar, they have the LEDs and the lamps in the back. That's the light. You can see the characters, but there's no spotlight on them. There's no clear, visible way. If you can't see their entire face, that's okay, because the lighting is so natural, and it feels more realistic that way. And you can see the difference between the club, which is on the top, and the field on the bottom, because you're going to have baseball practice during the day. They don't use fancy lights. They use the light that's coming from the sun as a way to show just how more realistic the scene is, how natural it is, and it feels different from the artificial lights that people do notice when watching a film. Lastly, we have music. At the beginning of the semester, I didn't focus on the music, but as progressing in the semester, I realized how important music really was in a film. There's music in the introduction and the end scene of every film that is specific to the movie. It also caters to specific scenes. He will use the perfect classical music at the start of some, and others at the start he will use his rock and roll college music. So you wouldn't use violins to introduce or end a comedy about baseball, but you would about serious topics like in Waking Life. And why he chooses certain music, he is a professional. He is good at what he does. He chooses certain music because of how he wants the film to be represented. The introduction, he's going to use music that's going to get you in the mindset of this film. In the conclusion, he's going to use music that reminds you of the film that just played. and the music's gonna play in your head, and you're just gonna think back to all the elements that you just felt from watching the film. So Richard Linklater is a director, producer, actor in some cases, who started at a fairly young age and decided to become more. He decided to use his own elements, his own style, and be unique in the film industry. And I'm really glad he did, because he continues to produce films that alter people, and it's great to study. I'm so glad we decided to study him. And there's so much that you could learn from his films. Thank you.